So, first thing we have to understand is what is the definition of the working age population? So, and I believe there's space in your notes for you to get this down.
Oh, it's already written, I think. It says, in Canada, this is defined as the country's total population minus the following groups: those under 15 years of age, those living in 3 territories where on Aboriginal reserve, and full-time residents of mental and penal institutions or hospitals, and those in the armed forces.
Okay, so let's look at why do we exclude people under the age of 15 from our working age population?
Wait, will it be considered like child labor?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Those exact words were in my head. So yeah, perfect. You don't want child labor, right? We want our kids to have a chance to be kids before they get into the workforce. This is a little more tricky. Why do you think they exclude people living in the 3 territories or on Aboriginal reserves? Rex, I think you might be muted.
Oh, because I'm pretty sure they just like do their own thing.
Okay. Yeah, so that's part of it. Because Native people of Canada have a different relationship with the government in terms of taxes. So people on Indian reserves don't have to pay taxes the way the rest of the population does. Same thing with Inuits living in the territories. So that's the idea there, is it's just they do their own thing. They have a different tax relationship. Okay, so why do people who work, who are full-time in mental institutions or prisons, why are they not counted?
Because they can't do any work.
Well, they can, but they're just not eligible to get paid for their work. So if you've seen any movies or whatever in prisons, people generally have jobs that are assigned to them, but they're not getting compensated for those jobs. Make sense? Okay. So as long as we remove those 3 groups of people, we have what's called our working age population. But not everyone in our working age population chooses to be part of our labor force. Because we have, so how old are you, Rex?
I am 13 this year.
Okay. When you turn 16, you'll be eligible to be part of the working age population because you're 15 or over. Will you choose to be part of the labor force? Likely not, because what will you be doing?
Like I would be doing like just a bunch of labor.
Are you going to be looking for work when you're 16?
Maybe.
Most likely not, because you're probably still going to be in what?
School?
Yeah, I highly doubt, Rex, that someone of your intelligence is going to drop out of school at the age of 16 and start looking for work. Would you agree with me?
Sure.
I think your parents will kill you if you do that. So that means that you would be eligible. You're in the working age population, but you wouldn't choose to look for work. So therefore, you're not part of the labor force. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So not all people in the working age population choose to be part of the labor force. Students choose not to be part of the labor force. What other groups of people may choose not to work, even though they could?
Rich people.
Exactly. If you have a trust fund from your parents and you don't need to work, maybe you'll choose not to. Who else?
Old people?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're retired, you may choose not to work, even though you're eligible to. And if there's a stay-at-home parent, like if your mom or your dad stays home, they may choose not to work. So all those people are part of the working age population and eligible to work. But if they choose not to be part of the labor force, they don't have to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we end up with is, I just did some research to find these numbers. The population of Canada as of 2020, roughly 37.6 million. Okay? If we exclude those people who are under the age of 15 and who live in the territories or on Aboriginal reserves and people in mental hospitals or prisons, what we exclude then is 6.8 million people, okay? So we're left with a working age population of 30.8 million. Make sense? Okay, so far we've got 30.8 million people who could choose to work if they want to. However, of that 30.8 million, 10.1 million are either full-time students, they're retired, they're stay-at-home parents, or they're independently wealthy, they're rich, like you said, and so they're choosing not to work. So that leaves us with a labor force of only 20.7 million people. From the labor force, there's two categories. You're either employed or you're unemployed. Okay, so the reason this is really important to understand this, Rex, is let's say you see a newspaper article, and that newspaper article tells you that the unemployment rate in Canada is 10%. Well, if you don't understand this, you might think that means 10% of the population of Canada is unemployed. Well, what's 10% of 37.6 million? I think you're muted right now.
0.76 million?
Yeah, so you might think that there's 3.76 million people unemployed in Canada, which is not true because the reality is that there's only 10% of 20.7 million. Only 20% of the labor force is unemployed. So that means how many people?
2.2.
2.07. Like 2.1 million people. So do you see the difference? Like from 3.76 million to only 2.1 million, that's a huge difference in the number of people who are unemployed. And you wouldn't know that if you've never studied economics. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you get that? Okay, so that's why it's important to understand this breakdown. So again, what groups of people do we remove to get our working age population?
Not in working age, like people that are very young.
People under the age of 15? Who else?
Like people that,
It's right here. People who live in the territories and non-Indian reserves. And
also like full-time residents of prisons and mental health.
Right, exactly. So that's 6.8 million people that are not in the working age population. Those are people under the age of 15 in the territories or in prisons. That's where we get the 30.8 million people. Who would these 10.1 million people represent? Those who choose not to be part of the labor force.
Like rich people, retired, and then like the students.
Yeah, perfect. So what we're left here is just the portion of our population that chooses to be part of the labor force. And those who've chosen to be part of the labor force, there's two categories. You're either employed or you're unemployed. Cool?
Yep.
It's people who are in the labor force and who hold paid employment. So this is a key distinction. To be considered employed, you really only have to be working 1 hour per week. As long as you're working at least 1 hour per week, you're considered employed. Even though it's tough to live off of only 1 hour a week of employment, you're still considered employed. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say that you're working 20 hours a week as a volunteer at your local library. Are you considered employed?
Yeah.
You're working 20 hours a week as a volunteer at your local library.
No, you're not, because volunteers don't get paid.
Yeah, there's no paid employment there, so you're not considered employed. Okay, so the paid part is key and the 1 hour per week is key. All right, and here's our definition of unemployed. People who are in the labor force, they have to actively be seeking work, but they have less than 1 hour per week of paid employment.
People who are in the labor force actively seeking work. But have less than 1 hour of paid employment per week.
Okay, so why is it important that they have to be actively seeking work? As soon as they stop actively seeking work, what happens?
They just either they need to like beg or they need to rely on government funds.
Yeah, well, they're no longer part of our labor force. Like, they're just become part of our group of people who are full-time students or retired people or whatever. They've chosen not to be part of the labor force if they've stopped actively seeking work. Make sense? Okay. So next thing, we need to know our formulas. So unemployment rate is the total number of people unemployed over the total labor force.
Wait, so how many do we have not employed?
Sorry?
How many people do we have like not employed and like what?
So if we look back to the chart from the research that I did, the unemployed was 2.2 million as of when I did this research.
So like 20.7 divided by 2.2.
Okay, so let's look back to the formula.
2.2
divided by
20.7, which would give you 10.6% is not employed.
Yeah, and does that seem high?
Yeah, but like that's only in the labor force.
But why would it be high this year? What's happened this year that might have increased our unemployment rate?
COVID?
Exactly, yeah. So it does seem like a high unemployment rate, but it makes sense given what's going on in the economy right now. Makes sense?